Everyone, welcome back to the Grow Yours podcast, where we meet with niche advisors and consultants to talk about their business and business growth. Today, I am joined by Vlas Lezin, and he is an innovation consultant and the founder of a firm that specializes in helping large organizations to build their internal innovation capacity. Now, that sounds like a lot, but we're going to get into exactly what that is and how that works. Vlas, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
No, not a problem. Super excited to get into it. And I have a feeling this is going to be a big learning one for me. So I'm super excited.
Let's hope for that.
All right, cool. So before we get into exactly what corporate innovation is, can you give the listeners a little bit of a taste of who you are and your background, where you came from?
Yeah, absolutely. So before joining Silicon Valley Innovation Center, where I'm currently senior partner and chief operating officer, I spent about a decade on the Wall Street working for Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo Securities, so investment banking and trading arm of Wells Fargo. Have bachelor in computer engineering, computer science, master in finance. I used to be a competitive swimmer back in the day, but now just doing the innovation and other things that make me happy.
Awesome. Short and to the point. So what do you think was the main catalyst that brought you from finance into innovation consulting?
Well, I think that if you look into the true finance, when it comes down to institutional finance, when it comes down for you working for your clients, you're not really doing finance, you're not really doing M&A, you're not doing IPOs, you're not doing trading. You're actually solving a real business problem for your customers, be it a acquisition, be it growth, be it hedging their exposure to certain commodities. So it really comes down to serving your clients and making sure that their business operates better. So, and that's a very close ethos, if you will, on what consulting and innovation is about. It's bringing change. It's bringing something that makes your organization better. So, and since I was in this intersection of finance and technology, it gave me a unique purview into how can you use technology in financial sector or elsewhere to actually drive the change. But the more I was driving the change from the technology standpoint, the more I understood that while technology sometimes piques the interest, and one of those things that we put on our banners, right now it's AI, back then it was cloud computing, all of this, right? All of those buzzwords. It is actually trying to change people and processes to make the business better, whatever your definition of better is. So for me, it was quite a natural transition, just saying, hey, instead of using this new mindset of applying new things, whatever they are, different new approaches to the employee engagement, different approaches to the customer engagement from financial services to the broader scale. So that kind of what drove me to the innovation, this desire to solve problems and use cool, new, shiny things to actually drive that change. But again, being not just a sort of a software developer or solution provider, but actually trying to look deeper and change organization within.
But wasn't that transition, especially from finance, which I feel like is super structured, to this consulting environment, especially in Silicon Valley, you didn't get hit with like a wave of, I don't know, chaos?
To the extent, of course, everything, every new job, every new transition definitely is a learning experience. And that's a learning experience because you have a little bit of this imposter syndrome, right? How I'm going to do it, how I'm going to do it, this new thing, I haven't done it before. I don't have this comfort of doing this. But I, in general, a pretty positive person. And one of my favorite phrases when it comes down to trying to work on some of the challenging problems is that the expert is the person who made every possible mistake in their field. So I kind of come to the approach of, you know what, I'm doing it the first time, probably first time, maybe second time, it's not going to be perfect, but that's really the only way of how you can grow and how you can attach this. And you'd be surprised how much chaos is actually in finance, starting with chaos on the financial markets. Every day can bring something new. going into some kind of the internal conundrum, right? If you need to report something to the regulator, but you realize that there was a mistake somewhere, how do you handle it? How do you do all of those things? So I don't think that the chaos is necessarily a prerogative of, let's say, Silicon Valley. So I think from that standpoint, it was less of the challenge. And I also think that there is a very good concept that in finance that helped me work in consulting is that in finance, a lot of time you're trying to predict the future. You're trying to predict the future of the company operations, or you're trying to predict the future of the markets. So that's kind of already, this random walk, this chaos, that's ability to trying to use the trends and the current position to interpolate into the future, which I think helped. But then at the same time, I think I really like that chaos, and I really like bringing the structure to that chaos. So that was definitely something that I liked very much, and I'm still loving 6 years since.
That the way that you just worded that reminds me of I don't know if you've seen the Batman movies, but Bane.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was like you adapted the dark. I was born in it.
I mean, to the extent, right? And I think, and I think as everything, right? It takes a certain amount of personality to be in this innovation chaos. It takes the specific personality to do pretty much anything, right? If you want to be really good at anything, you cannot just train yourself to be good at something. You need to have some predisposition. And I think a lot of times people who are successful, they either lucky enough to find it from the very beginning, or they kind of wave their in and gravitate towards something that really fits their personality. And I would say that this consulting innovation chaos, whatever you can call it, definitely fitting my personality more than this finance was.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So let's talk about this innovation and exactly what it is, because innovation is a very broad term.
Yes.
But last time we spoke, you said you guys are really solving three main problems, which is building internal innovation capacity, focusing on future trends within the right network, and creating spaces for internal alignment.
Yeah.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into each of those things, what they are, and how they help the people that you help.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me probably even step back a little bit about what is my definition of innovation, right? Because there are so many things that goes into this, and it's one of those what I call nothing words, right? That kind of mean everything and nothing at the same time. It's like better, right? I mean, better, how do you define better, right? Is it faster? Is it bringing you more revenue? Is it bringing you all of those things, right? So it's really one of those terms that I think every time when I talk about innovation, I start with that, is that what do we mean by the innovation? Because probably if I ask 15 people in the room and they don't hear their and other answers, they will probably give me at least 5 quite distinct answers. Some of them probably going to be similar, but there's quite a diversity of interpretation. So as a first step, I always say that I see innovation as a positive change in people, processes, and technology. And then when you sort of start there, then you can kind of say, okay, so if I want to change those three things, then I can actually provide education. Then I can provide future trends and seeing how I can work with those future trends. And lastly, when it goes to that internal alignment. And that's, I think, is a model and a framework that works really well for us and for me just to deliver that value. So if we say that, I want to change my people, if I want to change my people, which usually is the most potent, the most important thing that you're trying to change. And by when I tell your people, I mean that it could be your internal people, your employees, how your employees react, how your leadership reacts, how your leadership acts, right? But also your customers. One of my favorite story that I tell about pretty much to all of my clients is that there is a huge transformative power in changing people behavior. And my favorite example is that Airbnb and Uber. Airbnb and Uber did something so profound, just not from kind of business perspective, but from psychology perspective. They went against everything that our parents taught us in the last 50, 100, maybe 200 years. Don't get into the stranger homes and don't get into the stranger cars, right? But they actually changed the way that we travel, both in terms of mobility, but also in terms of how we stay. And that's real the power of the transformation. All of the big companies, all of those Silicon Valley giants, they didn't just create a technology. They created a different way of how their customers interact. And that's kind of a main driver. So if we go about changing your people, positively changing your people, well, the first thing that you want to do is you can either start with internal alignment or you can start with the education. Which one do you want me to pitch first?
Let's go with education first, then internal alignment.
Okay, awesome. So, and I think education is kind of defined into two major categories, at least as I define it, right? Is the first one is that what is it out there? So just to know what is actually happening, a little bit more of create a mental map of what is out there and how it creates the value and how it works in general, right? So that's the first one, the first one. But then the second one is that once you understood what is out there, how you can actually do certain things, how you can, after you know what you want to do, how do you know it from the very beginning? And this process is usually both academic and practical. And in our experience, and when it comes down to changing the people, it's much more impactful to talk to people who are actually doing it and maybe ahead of you in the journey than talk to professors who are doing the research. Both are very useful, but the people who are doing these things right now, they are usually a little bit ahead, right? So uh, pretty much AI became a big thing in 2021, 2022, right? And only right now we kind of catching up with some of the industrial research to see what works and what not. Obviously, there's like a cutting edge R&D things that majority of the people wouldn't understand just because it's not their areas of expertise. But there's a certain lag in this academia and lag of time and lack of this practical challenges that people face. So definitely from the education perspective, what we found our sweet spot is that we can educate people not by the professors, but by the experts who are doing this work right now, be it at Google, be it at Amazon, be it in all of those other firms in Silicon Valley that complement some of the knowledge and know-how that we have internally. So our sweet spot is to be generalist enough to capture the trends almost real time, but then rely on the external experts from all of those big Silicon Valley companies to provide nitty-gritty education about how can you do those things today and not wait until the next research paper is published.
So how do you take all that? So I'm a little confused. So you're saying that you're literally having the people from these tech giants speak?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. And then, all right. So then once you get this education to these people, how do you get them 100% aligned with the education? How do you get the leadership to fall in line? And then, well, I guess it starts with leadership, right? And then
Yeah.
everybody else below.
So it usually comes in two flavors in my experience. So the first one is that when you have a leadership that is, I wouldn't say confused, but maybe don't know where to start, right? And I'm going to super simplify it, but I would say something like, oh, our chairman of the board told us that we need to do more innovative. What does that mean, right? We've been making those widgets for 150 years. We're like world leaders, and now we need to do innovation. What is that? So that's kind of like the first alignment type. And then the second alignment type is that you have someone on your senior position who actually knows how to move forward, but they need a little bit more of the external validation, but also just a dedicated time to actually start to seeing those trends. And I think that's in both cases what really is a biggest driver for that internal alignment is actually carving out a specific space for people to think about it, to discuss it, and see what should be the right strategy forward. So it doesn't need to be in Silicon Valley. It doesn't need to be in any of those places that we do in the world. But how often do you really in your organization bring everyone or who leads, let's say, certain things into one room and give them dedicated time to think, to communicate, and understand what is actually going on. But there's a very, very important portion on it, is that this communication has to be genuine, and someone needs to watch over that communication, because a lot of times, and I don't blame anyone, we are become so focused and so good in our day-to-day activities that our brain is so much grounded into that, and everything else it's taking some kind of the shortcuts, right? And sometimes there's a corporate jargon like get our ducks in the row. Yeah, what did you actually mean by that, right? So really, that eternal alignment and that specific space for people needs that discipline to say, well, let's just drop all the corporate jargon, let's just drop all of those complex things that goes into our business, and actually communicate as human beings on what that means to take our organization to the next level, without corporate jargon, without this almost baggage of our day-to-day activity, and really start to align on what our priorities are. And those don't need to be complex, but just the sheer fact that you can compare, let's say, different priorities just from kind of quickly estimate of what it might mean for your company, just this whole process is extremely powerful. And surprisingly, a lot of companies don't have it, and they rely on either some kind of the corporate strategic speak, or on some very complex analysis. Both of those absolutely valid and sometimes vital. But a lot of times the misalignment comes from miscommunication. It's either not enough communication between the people who make decisions, or people just fall down into this, corporate jargon, those brain shortcuts, boilerplate language that maybe means something for them, but they do not communicate the depth of that particular conversation, and they do not communicate everything that actually goes within those titles.
So when you're creating these spaces to have these conversations, what does that like look like? Are you guys super analytical about like the design of the space, what's in it, and like almost like the feng shui, if you will?
Well, I would say that it's not so much as a feng shui, right? It's more about being a little bit ruthless almost, right? And start people calling out, like, and call out on people when they kind of go off track. So that's why you always take the retainer first, right? Just in case you hurt somebody's feeling, you still get, the bill is still getting paid. But I think it really comes down to really be not afraid to say, well, what do you mean by that? Can you clarify? Can you rephrase it? Can you actually tell us why do you think that? Right? So I think it really comes, when it comes down to those places, is that make sure that people obviously not distracted. So they do have at least a couple hours of uninterrupted thinking. And in our world, it's painful because we constantly have this dopamine rush. We constantly have on our phones, either for work or for checking something. And then when you have this sort of silent space, it's a little bit almost a withdrawal syndrome. But 30 minutes in, you actually start to get in real ideas, real communication. And your job as a person who designed that is to make sure that this alignment comes from the genuine communication that actually delivers the information, and not just words. That I said, nothing words. One of the things that I actually do is that I would go in and I have the running list of the words that you cannot use while you say that. Things like agile, world class, adaptive, forward looking, world class, right? So I actually have a list of the things that you cannot say, and that actually makes people really think about what they say and really try to put some extra effort into defining what that is.
Interesting. So you're literally you're going in and you're actually controlling these spaces for a period of time, or is that
Yeah.
what you're doing the entire time with your clients?
No, I think that there is a good balance of that, right? You don't want to get this almost brain fatigue, just to know how much you thinking and how much you're trying to do this. So it has to be fairly intense, right? It has to be fairly intense, and it's usually a good foundation. Then you can expose people to new concept. Then you can expose them to, let's say, Googles of the world and the Microsofts of the world and all of those other firms who probably ahead of you on the journey, or they have clients who are ahead of their journey. But you definitely want to build a foundation, that internal alignment, through a little bit of the intensity, discipline, and almost rewiring how people are thinking, and just, oh wait, that's what I actually want, right? And one of the other exercise that I like to do when we try to either prioritize things or we try to look into them from the different direction, I would say, well, everything that your organization does, and if we're talking for profit organization, it does for three reasons only. It's trying to make more money, it's trying to save money, or it's trying to please the regulator. Everything else is boiled down to those three things, right? And we can talk about marketing later on, right? But the from the marketing perspective, it's not about getting more hits on your website. It's not getting more hits on your podcast. It's not getting more exposure, whatever that means. It creating more revenue, and that's what it's supposed to do, and that's how you should do it, right? So really just trying to get people really shed everything that is off, uh, shed everything that kind of their constant modus operandi that they so used to, that they don't really think that much every day about it, because you know how to do it, you know how to speak, you know how to run those meetings, you know how to do those things. Obviously there is still a lot of intellectual power comes into that, but there is a lot of shortcuts. So trying to remove those shortcuts and force people to think a little bit differently is a great foundation, and probably the greatest foundation to actually driving the change internally.
What kind of resistance do you get to these concepts when you come in? Is there a lot of people that are like, this is stupid, or like they just can't figure out how to? Well, I mean, it has to be a thing.
Yeah,
There's no way that everybody just 100% agrees with you when you walk in the room.
yeah.
So I'm curious what type of objections you receive, like when you're like, all right, don't use these words, or I don't know, whatever other strategy you propose.
Yeah, so I think that it's probably one of the biggest obstacles that I hear, to summarize them. And you're right. There's always someone who's more involved, someone who's less involved. Uh, they are really trying to sometimes pick up the terms and speak the language that is fully applicable to their entire offering. So let's say a pharmaceutical company. Pharmaceutical company may have, 19, 20 different units who work on the cancer drug, who work on, I don't know, COVID drugs. And all of them kind of have different clients, and they all have different way of thinking and different way of operating. And they say, well, for our entire company who does all of those 25 things, we cannot just say, hey, you know what, this is our customer. We need to be so specific about it, and we need to provide a world-class pharmaceuticals to treat every person in the world. I mean, that might be the case, but how do you prioritize them? How do you? And it's like, it's one of those consulting cliches. Everything is priority, then nothing is, right? So it's not really about getting the right language every time, but it's more about those trade-offs. If you say that you're literally trying to drive all of those 20 business units at the same time for the different customers, then you probably cannot just prioritize things, right? Or if you say, no, 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 but we have actually top three customers, all of those 20 units is great, but there's one who's generating the most, then the question becomes, well, do you want to focus on that one? Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe not, right? So it's really, all of that resistance is out there, but it's not about, it's, again, from my standpoint, it's not about trying to make them think the way that I think, right? It's not about that. It's about that, okay, if you communicate this, then those are the consequences. And are you okay with those consequences? And that's a lot of times in the big organization, especially where you have maybe like a lifers in terms of people who've been there for 30, 35 years, you'll see that the leadership kind of starts thinking the same and it becomes a huge echo chamber. And people don't actually put a lot of kind of scrutiny over some of the things that are being said. And then there's also, again, there's a seniority that is being played. So that's why it's so important to have those almost painfully honest conversations, because those that actually take the companies forward and those that help people to actually put extra intellect into the strategy, into the transformation, into innovation, whatever that is, that's how you actually build that internal alignment, only if it is resonating with everyone. Because if that wasn't prioritized, if it wasn't somehow put into something meaningful, all of, like, literally everything that company do is that, well, you want to increase profits, for that you need to increase revenue and lower your expenses. That's it, right? Let's put it on the company ladder, let's put it on our strategy, don't go into more details. That's effectively is, right? And that's a lot of times, unfortunately, that's what a lot of times those visions and alignment comes down to, is those kind of things that are true, yes, of course, but they don't really have any substance behind them.
Interesting. Okay, so you mentioned we get to talk about marketing, which is more in my wheelhouse because everything you just talked about is. So when you started this business, how did you go about acquiring clients for this innovation consulting? Because it's not something I think most companies understand that they need. Yeah. So a lot of them are problem unaware. So I'm curious how you started your marketing initiatives.
Yeah, definitely. So just one thing is that I actually joined the firm a little bit later on, right? So we did redefine it quite a bit, but it started a little bit earlier, right? So I had a little bit of the leeway there from that standpoint. But in terms of attracting your customers, right? There are kind of two ways of how you can do it. And I think about it more from communication standpoint, right? You either have to be super selective about what is that you offer, right? So you need to effectively find people who have problems for which you are bringing the solution to. So that's kind of the one, right? Is that you really need to be very specific, is that, you know what, I'm going to target those kind of people who are facing those kind of problems and those kind of solutions that I can impose. There is definitely a part of, brand building. There is a part of bringing certain thought leadership to it. But in order to do quick wins in the B2B kind of space, and by quick wins, I mean 3 to 6 months, right? Unfortunately, we have that sales cycle. You need to find people who are kind of looking for the same problem as who kind of looking for the solution for the problem that they already have. So I think it really comes down to trying to understand who your target market is and be very specific about what we offer. If I reach out to someone and say, hey, we offer a innovation and educational consulting in this space, it's like, okay, everyone does, right? Everyone does. Like, you and 25 other people on the block. What is so special about you that will allow me to solve my problem better? So that's the first one. And then I think the second one is a little bit more riskier, but also in terms of how can I catch someone's attention? Sometimes, it is picking up the phone and doing the cold calls. Sometimes it's going to the conferences and meeting people and trying to understand what that is, right? But effectively, as with pretty much everything in your life, the second part is that you need to do something that few others are doing. And that effectively becomes a very important part of your strategic planning, is that, are you a consultancy that offers a very specific thing to a very specific problem? And that's the beginning of your funnel. Obviously, you can do other things and upsell and find the others. But when it comes down to marketing, If I go right now on my Instagram, every other ad is about some lead generation service. And they honestly, they all look the same, right? How would they catch my attention? They need to do something specific, something different that would actually catch my attention. I might very well be needing their service, but it's really hard to break without that differentiation point.
Yeah, I see a lot of the high level. Well, I was speaking of lead generation because that's something that I know pretty well. Is what they're doing is they're making the ads really, for lack of a better word, shitty and
Or generic,
yeah,
right? For that
no,
sense.
well, no, not even. The differentiator is that the ad is low marketing quality.
Yeah.
It's like a marketing team would never put that out. So that is what they put out because that's the differentiator right now. That's what's really catching people's attention and drawing things towards that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, a big thing in marketing is being able to demonstrate some sort of ROI from your
Yeah.
service. Because at the end of the day, like you could do all these cool things, all these deliverables, blah blah blah, but people are like, okay, but how are you going to make me money? So with something like your service, how do you go about demonstrating that? How do you show like, hey, as a direct impact of what we brought to the table, you are going to profit in XYZ?
So I think that, as I said, right, it's really about three things. Can we make more money for you, right, by bringing you businesses? Have you
Mm-hmm.
thought about doing this, right? And there is, probably the cool thing about innovation and consulting in general, right, is that there's so many data points that people usually already done something, right, and the beauty of it is that the world is a very big place, and and you can see those pockets of future or pockets of difference pretty much all over the world. And you have some of the banks in Eastern Europe who went and adapted some of the things from Chinese WeChat, right, what is called super app, and put it into the banking environment. And you can actually have some clear numbers about what that led to in terms of the revenue, in terms of the expenses, and all this. And you can use those numbers to show, okay, how what we are doing right now is going to increase your revenue, decrease your expenses, or please your regulator. And then you can use those numbers to paint the realistic picture, right? And I think people really appreciate when it comes down to sales, when it comes down to showing that ROI, that you actually kind of bringing the reality check on it, right? And then you say, you know what, if you spend right now a time for us to build that vision, to build that strategy, it will probably take 6, 12, 24 months to see the ROI. And are you okay with it, right? Because effectively that's the reality of the things. And that's, again, obviously you want to sell to as many people as possible, but if you don't manage those expectations, if you don't set the realistic goals and back it up by some data saying, hey, you know what, in those engagements, this what happened, we cannot do the whole thing for you, but we can start you on that journey, right? That management of the expectation, what builds good relationship and what builds those clients that come back to you year over year, because you set the right expectations and you show ROI that is achievable, and kind of talking about them risks as well, right? So that's, I think, that risk reward part is a lot of times that a lot of consultancies don't really talk about, that there are those risks. There are those risks that none of the consultancies can manage. There's also a knowledge base that none of the consultancy will know about your business. So we can only take you that much, and we can help you by doing that and start you on this journey, but we'll never have a depth and the knowledge to actually take this forward.
Very interesting. So how do you get that initial foot in the door to these these more problem aware people? Because there's these giants like McKinsey, and they kind of overshadow everyone because they're the consultancy group. So how do you go about differentiating yourself as an asset compared to somebody like them?
So I think that that again, it's more about trying to find the problem that you're trying to really solve. And let me give you a particular example from our business, right?
Sure.
In terms of the internal capacity, is that, let's say you want to have a really good strategy. You want to have a really good strategy, and you don't have that expertise, you don't have this knowledge inside your organization, and you go and you hire McKinsey's of the world, whoever they are, right? And they go in and they're experts, and then they go and then they work and they deliver the product for you, and they deliver the strategy. But the thing that you are missing is that you didn't know how to do the strategy before you hired McKinsey, right? And you still don't know how to do the strategy after you hired McKinsey and they did it for you. And for some people, it's absolutely valid, right? It's the same as the marketing, right? You can either have your internal marketing team, or you can outsource it and just rely on this fractional CMO lead generation. And that's totally fine, because you know what? I'm not in the marketing business and I cannot find a good marketing people. So how about I rely on someone whose whole job is to do that, right? And that's kind of the same goes with the consultancies. If you don't have skill set inside your organization, you can actually go and rely constantly, or at least in the foreseeable future, on the external expertise, which is fine. But if you want to build this internal expertise, if you have a tech, let's say tech talent of 500 people and none of them know how to do AI, you can hire, I don't know, Accentures of the world who will go and build the AI solution for you. And that might be your strategy. And then you are not my client. I'm not Accenture. But if you want to repurpose your internal team, bring subject matter experts from both the business and the technology perspective, and really change your people to what I'm talking about and change your processes, then you are my client. I'm not going to be offering the same thing as McKinsey is offering, right? They're in completely different league. They have completely different set of expertise, and a lot of times we kind of come in second, where they say, well, you know what, we have all of those. McKinsey went in and then they created the strategy, and then EY came in and they build implementation, and now they kind of left and we don't know what to do with it. How can we take it forward? How can we build it internally? And that's my sweet spot, and that's where I can get my foot into the door. Not all of the companies will be looking for it. Not everyone is looking for the fractional CMO, but there will be plenty of people who are looking for my services, and for them I can deliver the value, I can show ROI, and I can actually create the value out of it.
Okay. I think that's a great way to leave it off. And as we wrap up, I want to know, what advice would you give to organizations that know they need to improve their innovation capacity but aren't sure where to start?
I would probably say that the first thing to do is to really define what you want to be, right? And there could be several ways around it. One of my favorite techniques is to do what is called future casting. And I didn't create it, right? It has been in academia, in practice for almost 30 years now. I think it was like in the early 90s when they came up with it. But the idea is super simple. You imagine that you have unlimited budget, that you have unlimited everything, you have no constraints. Imagine your company in 5 years. What would it look like? How your new changed organization will look like in 5 years. And after you have that vision, and you can describe it any way you want, you can describe it in terms of the revenue, you can describe it in terms of your customers, and then walking backwards. And you would be surprised how achievable your fantastic, this no limit vision is, if you just put a little bit more thought and you put a little bit of the focus on some of those on kind of making your future a reality.
Okay. That was super insightful. And honestly, as a smaller entrepreneur, these things are just things I would never even consider thinking about. And hopefully in the future I have these problems, and then I'll be going to you.
Hey, I will give you a good offer for
All
as a
right,
return
cool.
customer.
Awesome. So before we end it all off, where could everybody find you?
LinkedIn, Vlas Lezin, that will probably be the best one. svicenter.com. We just all out there. So yeah.
Okay. Awesome. All right, everybody. This has been the Grow Yours podcast. Super insightful one. I hope everybody's thinking about innovating within their business, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.